Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Capone, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Let's Go Learn. And welcome to today's webinar, Crack the Code, Unlock Higher Math Scores. So math scores and outcomes are a big issue to a lot of schools and LEAs across the country. And that's just because they've been really lagging. Today's webinar, we're going to talk about how to really overcome this. Now, a lot of what we're talking about today is for things that you to do internally at your organization. And then some of it's going to be talking about the tools that we have, right? So on a positive level, you should be able to walk away with a lot of great information to help turn around your own math initiatives. So let me go ahead and show you the agenda for today. So first of all, I'm going to do one slide on who Let's Go Learn is, and then we're going to jump into baseline factors of why math performance is low. And then we're going to be jumping into some case studies talking about what some other schools have done, and finally I'll do a system demo, and then we'll have Q&A. So all of this is only going to take 30 minutes, so I'm going to go very quickly just to sort of keep this information flowing into you in a very efficient manner. All right, so let me first start off with who is Let's Go Learn. I founded Let's Go Learn in 2000 with Dr. McCollum. He ran the Reading Credential Program at UC Berkeley, and at the time our goal was to produce the best-in-class diagnostic assessment to inform instruction. Why is a student struggling and what do I do about it? So that's been our guiding principle all along. We've obviously moved into math and now we have instruction as well. But our mission is really to help at the teacher level, not just say at an accountability level that someone is doing poorly, but really to give you actionable data that's very, very diagnostic and precise. And so that's our goal. All right. So I'm going to jump right into it. So there's 4 factors I'm going to talk about. The number one factor, the first factor, is modern math content is very, very broad. Now, I'm going to be sending you an email. Tomorrow, you'll get this document as well. It's a Google Doc. It's a sheet. And what this is this shows you math content as it is defined by almost all states this day and age. So the y-axis is grade level. So K, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. And then across here are all the different areas: numbers and operation, measurement, data, geometry, algebra. So when you look at this visually, all these colored areas are the skills and concepts that are taught in modern math. So you can see it's very, very intense. In kindergarten, you're really teaching a few skills and concepts, but then as you start going up, it builds and builds and builds, and each of these columns is a stacked scope and sequence. So in order to get to this level, you have to have everything below it mastered, right? So this is one of the reasons why we have so many students falling behind, is because we've expanded math content to be very broad, and everything is stacked and reliant on each other, right? So this is the first factor we have to accept in order to see how do we get out of this. The second thing is that we have to understand that math is like a foreign language. In order to improve, we have to learn skills below it, right? So, for instance, here, numbers and operations skills. You need all of those skills in order to do measurement, geometry, data analysis, algebraic thinking. You need this, and they all build on each other. But I want to point out that there's this misunderstanding about skills or conceptual understanding with conceptual mastery. A lot of times we have a lot of math departments, especially in secondary, who really, really are sticking to their pacing guide and say, look, I need to teach all of this and I cannot diverge from it. But here's the thing. A lot of students, when they're older, they can understand conceptual understanding, but they can never get to mastery unless they have the underlying skills. So if I understand volume, I cannot figure out the volume of a cylinder unless I remember the area of a circle, right? So these things work together. So we have to understand when people talk about having to cover content, a lot of times older students, they'll get the conceptual understanding. They've been taught it, but the combination of skills mastery and conceptual understanding leaves the conceptual mastery, and this is important. So what's happening is a lot of our secondary students, they have so many gaps in their foundational skills that they can never reach conceptual mastery. I mean, it just won't happen. And it's really unfortunate. So we have to shift this thinking and understand we have to do a combination of the two in order to change outcomes. All right, the third factor here is if we want to close gaps, right? So this is a typical, let's say this is a 5th graders, and let's say the school has a 30% proficiency. Now it sounds pretty low, but it's actually pretty common. A lot of schools are only at 30% proficiency. But when you're at 30% proficiency, it only means that 14 to 70% of your kids are at grade level or above. Okay, that's because proficiency is actually a little below grade level on most state standards. It's a dirty little secret. If they did show the true proficiency, it would be even worse than it is today. And this means that 20 to 25% of your students are a grade below, and about 50 to 60% of your students are 2 years below. So here's the hard thing. When students are below grade level, their regular slope of learning is low, which means they can't keep up with what's being taught. And so they're not learning 1 year or 1 grade, right? So what we have to do is we have to achieve a 5 to 10x to boost them up as quickly as possible. And then we want to get them up to a higher point. So far below, we want to get to be below, and below we want to get up to be on grade. And then their rate of learning increases. But we have to shoot for a 5 to 10x rate of intervention, right? So this is really, really important. If you have something that just sort of works a little bit, it's not going to be good enough to close the gap at your entire school, right? So that's something else I want to point out. And it's really important to understand that. All right. Number 4, the fourth factor is that this is 5 random 5th graders pulled out of a class in LA. We literally grabbed them randomly, and we put them into this graph. So this graph these are all the different subtests of mathematics, right? There's 44 that we break it into. There's a bunch of numbers and operations, measurements, data analysis, geometry, algebraic thinking. Now, what it tells you is look at the overlap of these points. This one student, Ray, has, a kindergarten level instructional point, a 1st grade level, some 6th grade level, some, all over the place. But this tells you that students do not overlap well, which means, it means that it's very hard to scaffold in a class, especially as you start getting into secondary, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, or even 5th grade. And so we have to accept this. And even though some students may be grouped together based on an average score, like their overall score is 3.5, you can't just lump all those students together. They're still going to have very divergent skills, right? So this is another important fact. And I've seen this across the country. This is just a fact of profiles of students. But we're not used to looking at detailed data like this, but we have to accept it. All right, so the conclusion, upper elementary, middle school students have been exposed to many grade level concepts, but they just don't have the skills mastery, right? And so they really need to have skills masteries in order to get conceptual mastery, right? Focusing on basic skills and concept gaps removes the barrier for total conceptual mastery. This is really important. We really have to not forget those basics. All modern standards assume that you have basic skills mastery in order to achieve grade level mastery, right? And unfortunately, if you don't, then there's a breakdown. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into, because I want to keep it this fast pace, what are some schools doing to change these outcomes? So I have, I think, 4 or 5 case studies. First one is Ridley in Pennsylvania. They're an interesting case study. The background is they had consistently low middle school math scores. They had an intense pacing guide, so the teachers did not feel they could diverge from their pacing guide. They said, look, we have so much content, we have to stick with it. We need to teach the 6th grade material. So and they felt like they could not necessarily pull time away inside of their regular classroom period of time for teaching math. So this is probably sounds very similar to a lot of people. So what was the solution? They added a 7th period, a personalized learning period. They decreased every period by 5 minutes, and then they took those 5 minutes and added a 7th period. I've seen different schools do this different ways. It's not always called a personalized learning period. There's different names, right, for it. But this is what they did. Then they used our program, our Math Edge program, to give those students that accelerated learning they needed, and they really turned things around. They did 1 year of testing, and it was very low scores, and then they implemented this method, and then they've really turned around their proficiency, and did a major 180. Okay, here's another school district, Downey. Same thing. This is actually the same profile. Middle school students with low math scores, intense pacing guide, not able to introduce intervention to the regular classrooms. So their solution was they took extra PE hours, and when students have mastered all of their PE, they had enough time, not mastered it, but they met their PE hours. They actually pulled some of those students out who needed extra work, and they put them into a study hall period on a teacher-free period. So they got teachers to agree on their free period to have students just come into their classrooms and work on the Math Edge intervention, right? Again, so it's about trying to find that time. How do I get that time on task for those students who are behind? And that's how they did it. They had, I think they were like, I'm getting these numbers. It's like 20% proficiency in math as sixth graders, and they went up to a 31%. So they went from 20% proficiency to 31% proficiency in 6 months of using Edge. So that's just really quite incredible. Again, they adopted this method of being able to give students more intervention by using PE hours. All right, Montebello. Another one. Low overall math scores, no strong MTSS intervention built in, so they didn't really have a strong pullout, strong federal program department. So what did they do? They looked at the students who were near proficient and they put them into a summer school. They tested the students in spring, and then they pulled the students, and then they did a 14-day summer school, and then they gave them intense Edge, which is our program, and they also did it in ELA as well. And there was about 450 students, 2 summers in a row. On average, they had 0.25 to 0.35 years of gains in 14 days. Now, that's quite incredible. But it's not surprising either because they did the testing ahead of time. So during those 14 days, they just really focused only on the math that they needed, and they were able to get a quarter year to 0.35 years of gain in 14 days, right? And that happened over large numbers of students over 2 summers. So it's quite incredible. All right, here's another one, Mountain View High School. This was a continuing ed school. And so it's a high school. So it's when students are failing and they know that they're not going to graduate. So they bring them over to the school, and Dr. Smith, he's done some webinars with us. He's an interesting gentleman. And he took this program and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and get these students to graduate, right? And so he was allowed to really use whatever curriculum he needed to. So in a sense, he dropped the pacing guide. He didn't have to stick with high school curriculum or 7th or 8th grade curriculum. He could do what he wanted to. So he used multiple. He assessed them with our pre-algebra assessment. He shared the report with the student and said, hey, look, if you want to graduate, these are the areas you need to work on. And so he got the students engaged and motivated. Yes, I do want to graduate. And so he also gave them a credit recovery focus, like, hey, for every X number of lessons, you get so many credits. And so that was very incremental. So they saw tangible results. If they could do a certain number of lessons, and they did, they used ExactPath, which is another program. They use that for the students who are near grade level, but for the students who are really, really far behind, they used our program, which is MathEdge. And within 2 months, he got students to be proficient. And it was very common. But of course, the 2 months started once the student also bought in and said, hey, I'm going to do this. So you got to get that motivation. But then if you can target their gaps, you can get really, really accelerated math outcomes if you have the right assessment and instruction, right? Okay, here's another school. This is the last example. This is interesting. They had 0% proficiency in this middle school in math. Literally none of their students were proficient. The teachers concluded that students were totally lost, and the teachers and principals recognized this situation, right? So what was their solution? They actually got permission to drop their standards-based core curriculum. And so they flipped the classroom. I thought this was interesting because they embraced that fourth factor I said, where they realized all their students were really, really all over the place. So the students were on personalized learning, right, in groups of, and then the teacher would pull out 3 to 5 students every day and work in small groups, because they would say, oh, these 5 students need to work on decimal place value. I'll work with them. These 5 students need to work on, capacity or volume. And so they really flipped the classroom, and that's what they did in order to get improvements. All right. Okay, so let me go ahead and talk a little bit about Let's Go Learn, and I'm going to show you some of this data. So again, you have to a lot of this is you have to implement these changes in order to get that time on task, in order to really change how you're teaching and organizing students in classrooms, right? But our system is really, we're a precision diagnostic assessment. We're going to give you those assessments to figure out where your students' gaps are. And then based on that, we then provide an automated course for every single student within mathematics. And so they take our diagnostic assessment, then they have an automated course. The teacher can also use the data to do whole group or small group instruction. They could use that to do their own custom assignments. So it's really a complete system. And so let me explain why our system works. And this is important. You don't necessarily have to use our system only for this, but what it's really key for students who are far behind is you need a diagnostic model assessment. So when we assess math, we break into 44 subtests, and then we find the student's actual instructional level, right, within each of these subtests. So even though a student could be a sixth grader or fifth grader, I know that their instructional point within fractions is at first grade. And so then I can start teaching those skills one at a time to get them up. This is really important. A lot of assessments that just deal with strand scores, they don't know. They'll say, well, the student's low in fractions, but they don't know where they're at. They don't know where to meet them at. So let me give you an example. When you take place value, for instance, what is place value? Place value really is a stacking of these skills. Ones and tens, hundreds, thousands, expanded forms, 10,000ths decimal. So this student has all of these green skills mastered. That's why we have that little X right there. And then the skills they need to work on next are these two right here. So it's very simple. If I want to get the student up to skills, up to grade level in place value, I need to teach these two skills. This is what a diagnostic model of assessment does, is it's structured to identify skills and concepts and tell you what do I do next. This is really important. Now you could figure this out by just looking at the report. If you have a report from an assessment that says Richard is developmentally ready to do something, that tells you that they don't know for sure. And that assessment doesn't have the granularity or the precision to do it, right? Okay, same thing I'm not sure why I have this slide, but we do the same thing in reading as well. But today we're talking about math. All right, so let me go ahead and jump into the system. All right, good. We still have a good amount of time. So this is a group of students. This is live data. And what it is, we've changed all the students' names, right? So we're looking at a class. This is some middle school students here. And right now, initially, we see total score, numbers, operations, measurement, data analysis, geometry, algebra. And this student here is about mid-fourth grade. Some really, really low scores here as well. And we see the strand scores here, numbers and operations, 4.62, measurement, 4.67. Now, this doesn't tell you what to do. These are still summative scores because I don't know what to teach someone if they have a numbers and operations score of 4.6. It still doesn't tell me because numbers and operations are very broad. So what we do, our assessment is so granular that if I want to break into one of these, I click on numbers and operations, and now we see that numbers and operations is made up of numbers, place value, ordering and comparing, addition of whole numbers, subtraction of whole numbers, multiplication of whole numbers, and each of these numbers is tied to a skill or concept. Green means they've mastered it. Black means that it's not at the top level, right? And so if I wanted to, for instance, just sort my class by place value today, I can click on it, sort from low to high, high to low, or I can select place value and say instructional placement report. And now I see my class of students. So these students have mastered place value. These three students are working on 2 digits. And these students right here are working on decimal place value. So this is the first step. In order to really turn things around, you need an assessment that has the granularity at this level that I'm talking about, right? Now, our automated system, Edge, will assign lessons to the students and start working on the lowest skills first. But also, if I want to do it as a supplement, I know next week we're going to be dealing with something where I know I need all my kids to understand it. I could select those students, give them the decimal place value lesson manually. I could hit homework and I could assign it to those students, right? Or if I wanted to go ahead and just work with the lower students and say, okay, these 3 students, I'm going to assign them beginning place value so they understand. Probably these students are older. They probably just don't understand what ones and tens means, right? So I just need to teach them that place value lesson, right? So this is a really, really powerful report. Let me go back over here. Now, the other thing about it too is if I go ahead and take a look at some individual detailed report on a student right here, I could run this report. Now here, we're showing the entire scope and sequence of mathematics. So here's place value, tens, ones, hundreds. This is what I showed you before, and this is exactly where the student's at. So you can see if you go down, this shows this particular student, it's like 15 pages. we see all the stuff they need to work on. The double arrow is where they're working on next, and red means it's below grade level. So again, this is a map for exactly what we need to do. And you could either use this as a prescriptive report. You could share some of this stuff. We have a one-page report as well. But you could also use this to drive our fully automated intervention. And that's why our intervention is so accelerated, because we have this level of detail. So this data is also really incredible for PLC. So if you have a big PLC initiative, you want to have something like this. Okay, the one other report I want to share with you is just real quickly here, I just want to point it out. There's a special ed and a goal setting report. I'm not going to necessarily show that in detail. Let me just real quickly show it to you. This is if you're trying to write an IEP. I could toggle through and say, what can the student do? So in special ed, you need to know present levels. I could toggle to measurement or geometry. I could refresh, and then I could see the present levels and measurement. Again, if I now want to also go ahead and set up those goals, I could select instructional skills and hit refresh. This, in a sense, is pulling out all those skills out of that 15-page report and putting it in a more targeted manner for me, so that this is exactly what I need to work on. So I would work on these lowest skills first to help bring the student up. But it also allows me to come up with an individual plan for each student, whether they have an IEP or not. All right. I'm going to show you a couple more things, and we'll just take some questions. Because I think a lot of people who come to this webinar, they're really trying to conceptualize a framework for how do I turn things around. So I want to point stuff out. But here's the EDGE program we have. And so if we go ahead and take a look at this, we can go ahead and say, let's take a look at upcoming lessons. And right here, okay, we see this is what the student needs to work on. These are the lessons they're working on next, upcoming lessons. And then so they have about 6 kindergarten level lessons. They got a bunch of first grade lessons and then 1 second grade lesson. So again, this identifies all those things and grabs that and gives it to what they need, right? And that's the nature of this system, is it's really fully automated. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. So this is where, as you're working, one of the important things is picking the right tool for your program. If you really want to get and boost math scores, you can see how, if this is the whole conceptual map of mathematics, a score that says 745 for numbers and operation, or 640 for measurement, 580 for data analysis, this is not sufficient to tell a teacher which skills within this do I teach, right? It's just not possible. So in our system, we're providing a score, a placement within each of these vertical colored bars and telling you exactly where the student is, and then you roll all that up to have a total score. So this is a very different model than a benchmark test, because ours is actually a diagnostic. So you need to make sure that whatever measure you're using, you have that granularity like this. Granularity that breaks it out like this is what will allow you to get accelerated learning, right? It's very important to understand that. So I just want to say, don't be a statistic. I like saying that because I think a lot of people just say, oh, you hear a lot of lamenting about how math score is so hard to turn around. It's going to take years. You want to be an outlier. And the way you become an outlier is don't just do the same thing you're doing. Change your classes, flip the classroom, create a 7th period, change your model, come up with an instructional model, change your pedagogy, right? And do that with your team. What's going to work for your school, right? So brainstorm and come up with a plan. And then, of course, use technology to your advantage. I mean, our assessment is one of the best in the world. But there's other technologies too. Some of it could be using different instructional programs. Some of it could be some of the stuff that your teachers know how to do. So again, I saw another class. Oh, this is another example. I saw there was like a 4th grade class where they actually did grouping across all the 4th grade classes. So they all taught at the same time, and then they were able to rotate. So if they're working on fractions one day, one teacher got a certain group of students, another one. So they did instructional grouping across the 3 4th grade classes at their school. Now, this only works when you have bigger schools, right? But if you have 4 or 5 classes that run concurrently, there's a lot you could do if the teachers are all working together in their PLCs, right? Okay, thank you so much. If you guys want to set up and find out more about our tools, you can go ahead and scan that QR code, and we'll hook you up with one of our educational consultants. Let me go ahead and take some questions. It said, how did the PA district implement the 7th period? Well, the way they did it was they did the first year of testing. They showed that they had very low scores, and they saw all the gaps, and they shared that data with their teachers. And then they collaboratively came to the conclusion we needed to do something different. So they actually worked with their teachers to get them to say, yes, let's add a 7th period. Right? And so it took a little bit of time. It's not like they can just do it. So the administration was very much working with the teachers in order to come up with that. And they work with obviously the principals too. How would you train teachers to use data? I feel like ours already have too much on their plate. So the way I would start off with is the reports we have. The data, you want to make sure your data has something tied to it concretely. Like our data, 5.9 in place value means that the student has learned decimal place value. So you need to use measures that have links of instructional skills and concepts tied to their scores. If you don't have that, it's basically called a criterion reference assessment. If you have criterion reference assessments, that's going to really be a big thing. So just make sure you use the right tools to help your teachers. Can your assessment help me build IEPs? Absolutely. And I sort of real quickly showed that, and I apologize for that. But that IEP report I showed you, it allows you to mine the data. In an IEP, you have to know your students' present levels. And that's what our system does. It finds their real present levels. And then also the next step beyond the IEP is, what do I work on next? And so that IEP tool report is instrumental. Our customers are telling us that it's cutting down by 50% their IEP writing as well as their goal writing. So it's quite powerful. Oh, what reports do you share with parents? That one detailed report I showed you, that's something you could share with parents because everything is in English. It says what the student can and cannot do. That's a great one, but that's a 15-page report. We also have a summary report that's a 1-pager that lists in each area where the student's at, and then it has like a red arrow if they're below grade level. So that's a great 1-pager to share with parents too, because they can look it up. It says, oh, Richard's low in fractions. Right now he understands adding fractions with like denominator. So at least they understand what I can do, and they obviously that gives them a point if they do some lookup. All right. How does your assessment compare to iReady? So iReady is sort of like, sorry, I'm going back here. It's sort of like this. iReady has these scores at like 745, 640. So they are not as granular as we are, right? So they're just giving you this information and saying this is where the student's at, and then they're trying to place students into personalization based on these very, very blunt scores. So my argument when you have measures like that is it's not very accelerated because it's not going to give students the right lessons. At time, it'll give them a lesson that's too hard, or it'll give them a lesson that's too easy, and that's not good, right? Because it means you waste the kid's time and you're not focusing on accelerated learning, right? Okay. Here's another question. Ooh, I think I got like 1 more minute. You mentioned Edmentum. How does it compare to the Edmentum program? I think Edmentum is similar to iReady in the sense that it is really placing them with less measures, right? So there's less scores, and I think one of them actually only has 1 score. So it places them on a total math score. Imagine that. You're a 6th grader and it says, oh, your score is 4.5, and it places me based on 4.5 into a single linear instructional scope and sequence. That's really inefficient. That's really only good if the students are near grade level. So if I'm, in 6th grade, I'm a little bit behind, then something like that might work. But that's not the reality. Most students we have spikes in skills and kids are all over. So really do not use a blunt instrument for something that requires precision. All right, let's see here. I think that's it. All right, and we're right on time. So thank you so much. Again, let me go down to the last thing. If you want more information, go ahead and scan the QR code, and you can basically, we'll have one of our educational experts come out and reach out to you and talk to you. My information is right here as well, rcapone@letsgolearn.com. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. Bye-bye.